The bustling afternoon in Los Angeles was typical for Miguel. The supermarket was packed, customers weaving in and out of aisles, their voices filling the air with a mix of excitement and impatience. Miguel had worked here for years, every day, with a smile on his face, doing his best to help each person with patience and care. It was a job that, though often demanding, he had come to love. His heart was in it, and that was why people trusted him. But today was different. There was an unfamiliar tension hanging in the air. The door opened with a soft chime, signaling the arrival of a new customer. Miguel glanced up as the woman walked in, and immediately something about her caught his attention. She was dressed in a sleek, expensive outfit, her heels clicking loudly on the polished floor. Her presence seemed to fill the entire space, and for a moment the noise of the supermarket seemed to fade as she moved past the aisles with an air of cold superiority. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the store, dismissing everything around her. Miguel had seen all types of customers over the years, but there was something about this one that felt different, something unsettling. He straightened up, pushing aside any doubts, and made his way toward her with his usual friendly smile. He was here to help, as always. He had learned long ago that a little kindness could go a long way. "Good afternoon, ma'am," Miguel said, his voice warm. "Welcome to our store. How may I assist you today?" The woman paused, her eyes narrowing as she took him in. Her gaze was sharp, assessing him, sizing him up as though she were above him. "I need someone who actually speaks English," she said slowly, her words laced with a biting edge. "I'm not sure if the people here are even competent. Is this place even run properly?" Miguel felt a pang in his chest, a sting from her words, but he quickly masked it, his years of experience kicking in. He had dealt with rude customers before. This was nothing new. "Of course, ma'am, I'm happy to help," he replied with an unwavering calmness. He began to lead her through the aisles, showing her the products she seemed to be looking for. But every step they took was met with her sharp criticism. She was inspecting the shelves with an almost hostile intensity, as if searching for anything to nitpick. "These labels," she scoffed, pointing at a product in her hand, "they're all wrong. This store doesn't even know how to get basic things right. Are you all this careless?" Miguel's face remained neutral, though the sharpness in her voice felt like a slap. He couldn't understand why someone would choose to bring such negativity into a simple shopping trip. Yet he remained composed. "Ma'am, I assure you everything is accurate. If you'd like, I can double-check the label for you," he offered, keeping his tone soft and respectful. But instead of calming her down, his words seemed to fuel her frustration. Her grip on the product tightened, and she turned to face him, her eyes blazing with anger. "You think I'm some kind of idiot?" she hissed, her voice louder now, drawing the attention of a few nearby customers. "This place is a joke. I can't believe the service here. What are you even doing? Are you even trained to work here?" Miguel took a breath, his patience now stretched thin. He could feel his heart racing, the blood rushing in his ears, but he knew he had to stay calm. This wasn't about him. It was about providing service. He had been through worse. He could handle this. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady but firm, "I understand your frustration, but please know that we work hard to make sure everything is correct. If you would like me to assist you with something specific, I'm more than happy to help." But the woman wasn't finished. She turned away from him, waving her hand dismissively, as though he were beneath her. "I don't need your help," she sneered. "I'll find what I need myself." She continued to mutter to herself as she stormed off, her footsteps sharp against the floor. Miguel stood there, a feeling of unease creeping up his spine. The air in the store had shifted, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to explode. It wasn't just her behavior, it was the way she carried herself, like she was so far above everyone else. Like everyone else was just in her way. Miguel watched her for a moment, hoping the tension would dissipate, but as she picked up more items, her frustration seemed to grow, her anger simmering under the surface. Her next words hit Miguel like a slap. "This is ridiculous," she shouted, her voice cutting through the murmur of the store. "Why do I have to deal with this? Are you all this incompetent?" The entire store seemed to freeze for a moment, the sudden outburst catching everyone off guard. People turned to look, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. Miguel, his heart pounding in his chest, knew he had to act. He couldn't let this escalate any further. "Ma'am, I can help you find what you need," he said, his voice gentle but firm, trying to de-escalate the situation. But the woman wasn't listening. Her eyes locked onto his, her expression a perfect storm of frustration and disdain. "You're all worthless," she spat. "Just get out of my way." Miguel took a step back, feeling the sting of her words, but he didn't react. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lash out. Instead, he stood there, his resolve as solid as ever, but his heart heavy with the weight of this unexpected confrontation. He had always believed that kindness could change things, that if you just treated people with respect, things would work out. But today, the world felt different. Something was off, and Miguel couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was only the beginning of something much bigger. As the woman stormed off to the checkout, leaving a trail of tension in her wake, Miguel stood frozen for a moment longer, taking in the silence that followed her outburst. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure if kindness would be enough to handle what was coming next. Miguel was still trying to compose himself as he glanced around the supermarket, trying to collect the scattered items the woman had carelessly tossed aside. The tension in the air was palpable, a thick cloud that hovered over the store. It was impossible for anyone to ignore the storm that had just passed through. But while most customers tried to go about their shopping, a keen observer noticed something that Miguel himself had failed to see at first: Keanu Reeves. Keanu, in his trademark calm and humble way, had been shopping in the corner of the store, quietly moving through the aisles, his eyes scanning the shelves with a peaceful focus. He was just like any other customer until he noticed the rising tension. His attention shifted from the aisles to Miguel, who was now standing still, his eyes heavy with the weight of the confrontation. Keanu's instincts told him something wasn't right. His sharp awareness of the situation had him silently observing, taking in every detail. As the woman continued her tirade, Miguel could feel her words hitting harder with each passing second. "What is this place? The shelves are a mess, the labels are wrong, and there's no way someone like you should be working here." Her voice was loud, cutting through the hum of the store like a blade. Customers around the store began to notice. Whispers started circulating, eyes darting between Miguel and the woman, but no one dared to intervene. The atmosphere had become too charged, too uncomfortable. People moved back, trying to avoid getting involved, afraid of making the situation worse. But Keanu, unlike the others, had no intention of turning a blind eye. He'd seen Miguel, a hard-working man simply trying to do his job, being torn down by this woman's cruel words. And as the silence lingered, he made his move. Keanu calmly walked toward the woman, his pace measured, his presence still as ever. The sound of his footsteps barely broke the tense silence that hung over the store. When the woman noticed him approaching, her gaze flicked up. For a moment, she seemed to study him, not recognizing him immediately, but as her eyes met his, something in his demeanor stood out. There was no mistaking the quiet power in his eyes, an unspoken strength that spoke volumes without uttering a single word. The woman narrowed her eyes, clearly irritated that someone was stepping in to disrupt her performance. "What do you want?" she snapped, her tone dripping with disdain. "If you're here to defend him, I have nothing to say to you." Keanu, undeterred, met her gaze directly. His expression was calm, but his words were deliberate and firm. "Listen to me." he said, his voice low but carrying authority. "If you're here with that kind of arrogance, then I have nothing to say to you either." Her eyes widened. For a brief moment, surprised by his directness, but she quickly regained her composure. "What do you mean by that?" she retorted, confusion mixing with anger. Keanu smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that invited warmth. It was a smile that held a truth, a reminder of humility and respect. "I want you to think about this," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "Think about how far you're willing to go with your arrogance. How much are you willing to degrade others just to make yourself feel superior?" For the first time, the woman faltered. Keanu's words seemed to slice through her, striking at the heart of her self-righteousness. She hadn't expected anyone to confront her in this way. In all her life, she had never been called out for her behavior, especially not by someone like him. Keanu didn't give her time to respond immediately. Instead, he continued, his voice unwavering. "Miguel here works hard every day. He's dedicated to his job and he treats people with respect. Have you thought for even 1 second about how your words have affected him? How your arrogance could tear someone down when all they're trying to do is serve you?" Miguel stood in the background, his heart racing. He hadn't expected this. Keanu, the quiet, humble figure everyone knew from the movies, was now standing up for him in front of the very person who had attacked him. The woman, for the first time, seemed to lose her composure. Her face reddened, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for words, but none came. Keanu's calm, unwavering presence had done something she had never encountered before. It had made her confront the reality of her own actions. Her pride, which had seemed so solid just moments, ego began to crumble. Keanu had struck a chord in her, one she had never known existed. No one had ever spoken to her like this, not with such calmness, not with such truth. Keanu took a step closer, his gaze still steady. "I don't think you've ever stopped to consider how damaging your words can be," he said softly, "but I want you to think about it now. Think about the impact you have on others, because people like Miguel, people who care, don't deserve to be treated like this." The woman stood frozen, her pride warring with the truth Keanu had so effortlessly laid bare. She looked from Keanu to Miguel, the weight of her actions settling over her like a cloud. Keanu, seeing that she was at a loss for words, nodded gently, as though giving her space to absorb everything he had said. "I hope you'll take this to heart," he added, his voice quieter now but still full of strength. Without waiting for a response, Keanu turned and began to walk away, his movements smooth and composed, as though this was just another day in the life of a man who had seen and understood far more than most. The woman remained there for a moment, her mouth agape, her mind racing with thoughts she had never allowed herself to consider. For the first time, she truly thought about the way she had treated Miguel, and in that silence, the storm that had raged inside her began to calm. Keanu, without saying a single word more, had done what no one else had dared to do. He had shown her the power of empathy, humility, and respect. And as he disappeared into the aisles, Miguel stood there, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders, knowing that the lesson of the day was one that would linger long after the supermarket's doors had closed. The atmosphere in the supermarket had shifted almost instantly. The tension that had once hung thick in the air was now replaced by an almost electric silence. People had stopped what they were doing, the sounds of carts and footsteps fading into the background. All eyes were on Keanu and the woman who had been tormenting Miguel, as if waiting for the next move, the next word to break the stillness. The stares were full of anticipation, some curious, others conflicted. No one wanted to miss what was happening. The woman's face twisted with rage, her arrogance bubbling up once again as she squared up to Keanu, her voice rising. "Who do you think you are, speaking to me like that?" she shouted, her hands gesturing wildly in the air as if to emphasize every word. Keanu, however, remained completely calm. His posture was unflinching, his demeanor untouched by the venom in her voice. He didn't flinch or back away. His eyes were steady, his expression neutral. He spoke as though the entire situation were of no consequence to him, his voice smooth and measured. "I'm Keanu Reeves," he said, his words calm but carrying an undeniable weight. "But let me tell you something. What matters here is not who I am. It's how people treat each other, and right now, you're letting your arrogance speak for you." The woman recoiled slightly, her face turning even redder with the realization that someone had finally called her out for her behavior. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out at first. There was no defense, no witty retort, only the shock of being so directly confronted in such a public way. Her pride, which had been the center of her entire existence just moments ago, seemed to crack. But the woman wasn't going to let it go that easily. She was too stubborn, too used to getting her way without consequence. "Who are you to tell me how to act?" she shot back, her voice dripping with disdain. "You think because you're some actor you can come here and tell me how to behave?" Keanu's expression remained unchanged, his gaze steady, unwavering. He had faced far worse critics, far more toxic environments, and none of it fazed him. He wasn't here for drama. He wasn't here for an argument. He was here to make a point. "It's not about being an actor," he said softly, yet with conviction. "It's about being a human. We all share this world. We all deserve respect. And you've shown none." As his words hit the air, they seemed to have an effect on those around them. The customers who had been merely observing now began to murmur, some nodding in agreement, others staring in disbelief at the audacity of the woman to continue her outburst. The supermarket, once buzzing with the hum of shopping and casual conversation, had gone eerily quiet. The only sound was the woman's increasingly frustrated and defensive voice. At that moment, the supermarket manager, a middle-aged man with a no-nonsense attitude, walked up to the scene, having noticed the disruption and the growing tension. His eyes darted between Keanu and the woman, then quickly fixed on the woman's flared expression. He had seen enough. "Ma'am," the manager said, his voice firm and professional, "your behavior is unacceptable. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the store." The woman spun around, her jaw clenched in fury. "Excuse me?" she spat, turning on the manager, her voice rising even further. "Who do you think you are, telling me to leave?" The manager held his ground, unfazed. "I'm the manager here, and I'm telling you your conduct is not welcome. You've been rude to my staff and disruptive to my customers. Please leave the premises." But the woman wasn't ready to back down. Her entire world had been built on the idea that she was untouchable, that she could bend any situation to her will. She wasn't about to let some actor and some store manager dictate her actions. "Who do you think you are?" she demanded, her voice now bordering on a shout. "I'll have both of you fired for this. I'll sue." Keanu, standing quietly beside. The manager was the picture of serenity. His quiet strength seemed to fill the space, and despite the woman's angry outbursts, it was as though she couldn't find her footing in the face of his calm. "I don't need to explain myself to you," Keanu said quietly, his voice still steady but firm. "But you should ask yourself why you're fighting so hard to be so cruel." The woman's face turned crimson, a mixture of rage and humiliation flooding her features. She couldn't comprehend why no one was bowing to her, why she wasn't in control of this situation. She had expected everyone to cower, to apologize for her inconvenience, to make it all right so that she could continue her perfect, entitled world. But now, it seemed the world was shifting. She was the one who had to face consequences for her actions. Miguel, standing by, watched with disbelief and awe. He had never seen anyone stand up to someone like her with such grace, yet with such powerful force. Keanu hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't made a scene. He had simply spoken the truth, and in doing so, he had made the woman see her own cruelty. It was as if a switch had been flipped, and for the first time she had no retort, no excuses, no escape. And then, as if defeated by the realization that her usual tactics were ineffective, the woman finally snapped. "I'm done with this," she yelled, her voice seething with anger. "I'll never forget this." With a final forceful slam of the door behind her, she stormed out of the supermarket, her heels clicking against the pavement as if she were marching to war. The door swung shut with a resounding thud, and the store fell into silence once more. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The customers who had been watching, both amused and stunned, stood frozen in place. Keanu turned toward Miguel, offering a soft smile, his calmness as natural as ever. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice carrying a quiet concern that cut through the remaining tension in the air. Miguel, still processing the scene, nodded. His heart was still pounding, but a weight had been lifted. I am now, thanks to you." Keanu smiled. Again, a warm, genuine smile, before turning to walk toward the exit. His work here was done. He had intervened not with force, but with dignity, reminding everyone, especially the woman, of the power of respect and kindness. As Keanu walked out of the store, the whispers began again, not of judgment but of admiration. Miguel, still standing near the registers, felt something shift inside him, a new sense of pride, a renewed belief in the goodness of people, and in the quiet strength of standing up for what's right. The woman's departure hadn't just been a victory for Keanu. It was a victory for everyone who had witnessed it. As the woman stormed out of the supermarket, the energy in the store began to shift back into its usual rhythm. But Miguel was still standing there, processing everything that had just transpired. The crowd had slowly dispersed, and the air, once heavy with tension, now felt lighter. Keanu Reeves, the quiet man who had come to his defense, seemed to blend back into the background. Yet he wasn't quite done. Keanu, taking a final glance at the supermarket's door, turned back to Miguel, a soft smile playing on his lips. His calm, steady presence felt like a reassuring breath in the aftermath of the storm. "Hey, Miguel," Keanu called softly, making his way back toward the registers. Miguel, who had been lost in thought, looked up, startled. The realization that Keanu was speaking to him personally made his heart race. He hadn't expected any further interaction, but here he was. Keanu Reeves, the man who had just stood up for him, approaching him again. "Would you mind if we talked for a moment?" Keanu asked, his voice steady but warm. Miguel blinked a few times, still processing everything that had happened, before he nodded. "Of course, Mr. Reeves," he replied, his voice a little unsure but full of respect. Keanu walked over to him, stopping a few feet away, his gaze still calm, but now with an underlying seriousness that seemed to cut through the air. "Miguel," Keanu began, his tone gentle yet focused. "I saw something in you today. You take your job seriously. You treat people with respect, and that's not something you find everywhere. That's valuable. But I want to ask you something. Do you have any other dreams, aside from what you're doing now? Something you've always wanted to pursue?" Miguel hesitated, unsure of where this conversation was headed. His mind raced, back to his late-night thoughts, those quiet moments when he allowed himself to imagine a different life. "Well, yes, I've always wanted to start my own business, but I don't know. It just seems impossible. I don't have the resources. I don't know where to begin." Keanu nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I hear you. But here's the thing, Miguel. You have the qualities that make for a great entrepreneur. Dedication, humility, and the willingness to work hard for what you believe in. I'm offering you something, an opportunity. I know some people in the business world, and I can introduce you to them." Miguel's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? You're serious?" His voice was barely above a whisper, the weight of Keanu's words settling deep within him. Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek business card. He handed it to Miguel with a smile that was both warm and genuine. "This is real. Miguel, it's a chance for you to meet some people who might be able to help you turn that dream of yours into a reality. You deserve a shot at it." Miguel's hands trembled as he took the card, his eyes wide with disbelief. I don't know what to say," he stammered. "Why would you do this for me?" Keanu shrugged slightly, his smile never fading. "Because I see something in you. Because I know that you've got the drive and the heart to make something of yourself. If you want this opportunity, you know where to find me. It's up to you to take that step." Miguel was overwhelmed, his emotions suddenly rushing to the surface. He hadn't even allowed himself to dream this big. How could someone like him, a supermarket worker, ever have the chance to meet influential people? But now, standing here in front of Keanu Reeves, the impossible suddenly felt within reach. Without realizing it, tears started to form in Miguel's eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking as he looked at Keanu, the man who had not only stood up for him, but now was giving him a real shot at changing his life. Keanu gave him a soft, encouraging nod. "You don't have to thank me. Miguel, just make sure you don't let fear hold you back. Take this opportunity and run with it. You've got it in you." Miguel tucked the card into his pocket, his heart pounding with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. This was more than just a chance. It was a lifeline he'd never expected in a million years. As Keanu turned to leave, Miguel called out, his voice full of emotion. "Mr. Reeves, I won't forget this. I won't waste this chance." Keanu paused at the door, turning back with that same calm smile. "I believe in you, Miguel. Make it happen." With that, Keanu walked out of the store, his presence fading into the distance. Miguel stood there for a moment, staring at the door, his thoughts a whirlwind. He hadn't just received an opportunity. He had received a belief in himself that he'd never had before. From that day on, Miguel's life changed. The path he had once thought impossible to walk had opened up before him. With Keanu's encouragement and the connections he'd made through those introductions, Miguel was able to start his own business, a small venture that grew into something much larger than he had ever imagined. Years later, as Miguel stood in his thriving business, he often thought back to that moment, that one conversation, that life-changing gesture. Keanu had given him more than just a card. He had given him hope, and with that hope, Miguel was able to build the life he had always dreamed of, forever.